Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. Another solo one this week. I'm afraid you guys got the wrong Dan. It's me, Dan Wiseman. I'm truly riding solo this week, so bear with me. Dan, I think he's in the air as I record this video. He's off to Orlando with the family and his girlfriend. So put some lovely comments down there below to wish him the best time. And I already read it to Charlotte, who's been doing some amazing work for us. She's also in Amsterdam, so I'm doing everything this week. So yeah, I apologize for any mishaps you guys might be seeing in the final episode, final edit, sorry. Good start. But this week, guys, we're here to talk about Emi Buendia, the curious case of Emi Buendia, just exactly how he fits into this Villa team, the magic that he's brought to this side in his very short career in B6, why perhaps he struggled and is still struggling to finally and truly break into that team where he's best implemented, and exactly what his future looks like at Villa, because it is up in the air, as unfortunately some players are at the moment. A little bit up in the air as to exactly how longer term a future he has at this club. And I think I speak for a lot of us fans when I say I hope he's here for the longest time possible. But it's easy to see why he might be a little aggrieved with the situation that he finds himself in. So we'll see. But before we get into all of that, I have to mention our wonderful sponsors over at OneFootball. They are the best football app out there. They're the number one place for news, scores, stats, live updates, everything a football fan could want. It is the ultimate football media platform. And this year, to make it even better, they're showing live Serie A matches in app that you can watch anywhere on the go. They're also running a giveaway, bit of inside info, on their Twitter right now. So if you head over there, they're giving away 2 VIP or 2 general admission tickets, whatever you might prefer, to a Serie A match of your choice for match day 8 with Air of Football. You can just head over to their Twitter. It's their pinned tweet. It's the first thing you see. You can enter that giveaway. But guys, I'd highly recommend downloading the app. It's the place that gives me all of my Villa news. You can customize it based on the teams you want to hear the most about, and they'll send all of the latest news straight to your phone. We couldn't recommend it enough. It's what powers the Villa Filler podcast. So they sent me some great updates. And one of the updates I hope to see in the future, guys, is that Emi Buendia is back in the Villa team, because that puts a smile on all of our faces. It's whenever Villa tweet out that team news graphic, it's always the first comment, isn't it? Where's Buendia? Start Buendia. And I feel you guys, it's easy to see why. And I think one of the reasons why we all love Emi Buendia so much is because of how he operates in space, in very small spaces, in spaces that disappear and reappear and appear somewhere else. It's one of the biggest differences, I think, in the modern game compared to if you go back, say, periodically, 10 years at a time. One of the biggest differences I think you'll see is how quickly space appears, disappears, pops up, goes again. All the different teams, the emphasis on tactical styles, the amount of different formations, how quick and intense the game is, means that finding yourself in areas of space is not only very difficult to do, but then to operate in such a short space of time before that space then closes again is what makes guys like Lionel Messi is probably the best example and will always be. But then if you go sort of a tier down maybe, and it's not much of a step down, albeit, guys like Bernardo, David Silva, those kind of guys that you see operating in between the lines, receiving the ball, playing through balls, having shots, fancy flicks and tricks and 1 and 2 touch football. What makes them so exhilarating to watch and so enjoyable is because they have an intelligence that not many other players do. You have to be a really specific profile to sort of operate in that manner, where a lot of them sort of play wide 10 positions. And I think we have one of those at our club in Emi Buendia. In fact, we might have 2 if you include Felipe Coutinho in that bracket. They're not so much a unicorn, maybe more of a dying breed in the game, but these kind of number 10s are few and far between. And I think Emi is one of them. And I think that's what makes him so enjoyable to watch. He's such a rare profile. It's why it was such a big get. It's why we paid so much money for him. But maybe it's harsh to say that it's not worked out at Villa. Maybe that's harsh. But he's yet to establish himself consistently in the 11. And that is really confusing when you consider the amount of good things that he's done when he has been on the pitch. And that 9 times out of 10, if you do give him a shot in the team, be that off the bench sometimes or in the starting 11, he usually impresses. He usually wows you. There's often a lot of moments that you can cite in the games that he plays that are reasons for him to start the next game. And perhaps Coutinho has sort of inhibited that, and his January arrival, I'm not going to say that he had real momentum before January, but certainly made it a lot harder for Coutinho to get going. So for Buendia to get going, and for Coutinho, I suppose, because the two of them are pitted against each other naturally because they are similar-ish kind of players. And it does feel like it's one or the other in terms of the starting 11 and that's the way it sort of has been. I can't think of many examples. There may have been some, forgive me, where we've seen Coutinho and Buendia in the same starting 11. It's not to say that it can't work. It's just that we haven't really seen it yet. And it's hard to sort of, there's so much great data out there on Emi Buendia, and it's hard to pick too much of it out from this season because he has been not going to say a bit part player, but most of his appearances have been substitutes. And so it's difficult to really get some good data. Obviously, the Everton game was a real standout and probably his best game of the season where, you know, he got that late goal and he sort of ran that whole game. There's some really good data from that. But if you taking the sort of wider step back, I think you have to go back to last season to get a true understanding of just what he's capable of, because he didn't get a great run out. That's sort of what we think of last season, but he featured at least in 35 out of the 38 Premier League games, which is a very respectable total, really. Obviously, a lot of those were substitutes appearances, and that is the asterisk by it. But I didn't think it would be that much necessarily. But yeah, 35 out of the 38 games he played last season, 4 goals and 6 assists, so 10 goal contributions from 35 games, which when you consider the role he played is quite respectable, really. He finished 7th. Now, this is where it gets impressive. When you consider those minutes, when you consider how many of those would have been substitute appearances, he finished 7th in completed through balls in Europe's top 5 leagues last season with 21. That was one more than Neymar, one behind Bruno Fernandes. And if you're wondering who was at the top of that list, it's the guy I mentioned at the start of this video, Lionel Messi. And just on those sort of 4 players that I mentioned there, in Neymar, in Messi, in Bruno Fernandes, and obviously then Emi Buendia, that's the sort of profile I was talking about at the start of the video in terms of like the players that appear in space and those sort of tricky 10s come wide players that really make this position their own. And the data shows you in terms of, and I know I'm looking at through balls, it's not chances created or assists or goals or anything like that, but this is the data that we have to work with because Emi Buendia hasn't had the proper crack of the whip. And I think if you gave him that, the through ball stat turns into assists or expected assists or XG or something like that. And so to sort of go perhaps a bit deeper, in the Premier League at least, he had the best shot rate from through balls amongst any player with 25 plus through balls attempted. And I don't need to sort of go through the names that you can imagine were in that list. But to see Emi Buendia top is encouraging. But also when you look at the fact that Villa have really struggled to score goals this season, and maybe it's the biggest pitfall of the Steven Gerrard era that we haven't been able to get what is a very talented attacking line to truly get firing on all cylinders. Stats like that make you wonder perhaps why Emi Buendia is not in the team. There's another one I picked out, which was really impressive. Again, when you reference the amount of minutes and how many of those would have been starts for Emi last season, only John McGinn with 53, who, as we've seen this season, rightly or wrongly, is an absolute mainstay in that Villa team and has been under Dean Smith and Steven Gerrard. Only he with 53 made more key passes last season than Emi Buendia with 46. So you can see just from those 3 stats that I've given you how creative a player is, how important he can be to this Villa side, and how he ranks amongst his teammates as well, which is very interesting when you consider that they're the ones that are keeping him out of the team ultimately. And he ranks above them in those kind of metrics. Now, I want to caveat all this with, that's not to say that the role of a substitute isn't important. We have 5 substitutes now in the Premier League. And I think how we view substitutes and how we view being put on the bench is going to change a lot. And how we view substitutes and how teams use substitutes, I think, is also going to change. In the Euros, the Women's Euros early in the summer, Serena Wiegmann, I can't remember, it was like power players or something like that. She referred to this core group of 3 or 4 players that she would bring off the bench. It was guys like Ella Toon, players like that she would bring off the bench at the same sort of time at in every game, and they would impact the game and change it. And if you think back to the certain knockout rounds, guys like Ella Toon came on, scored goals that ended up being very important in England, going on to win games. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in football. And so it's not to say that now being a substitute and being able to come on and impact games is a bad thing. Emi Buendia has been very, very good at that when he's come off the bench. There's a bit of fire in his belly. There's a point to prove. He's trying to play for starts, and he produces some very good stuff off the bench. And I think there's a genuine case for players now looking at their roles within a team and saying, maybe that's where they operate best. I'm not saying Emi is one of those players, but it's just a caveat, something to think about, where sometimes it's not all doom and gloom when you see a player on the bench, because I think the way that we view that, it's no more not going to be you're out of the starting 11, more by, okay, I'm looking at you to go in and change things if things get a bit hard, heavy later on in the game. Just something to consider. This has obviously impacted his World Cup chances and his ability to break into the squad, the Argentina squad. And I don't think that's through any fault of his own. I actually think Emi could be a mainstay in this Villa team. I think he could be starting week in, week out, and I think he could still struggle. To emphasize why I think this is, I took the time to write out all of the wide players, come 10s, every player that was Argentinian that I think that can play in a 10/wide position, which is where Emi would want to play if he went with Argentina. All the players that can fit into those profiles that are with a shot of going to this year's World Cup. And for me, they are as follows: Lionel Messi, Paulo Dybala, Angel Correa, Joaquin Correa, Angel Di Maria, Lucas Ocampos, Papu Gomez, Thiago Almada, Nico Gonzalez, Eduardo Salvio. And then if you're having to go a bit further out than that, at a push, guys like Manuel Lanzini, Giovanni Lo Celso, Alexis McAllister, Rodrigo De Paul, Eric Lamela, Christian Pavon, Julian Alvarez, who I think can drop from a sort of second forward into a wide area. We've seen him do that. And then guys like Roberto Pereira, who's been used as a sort of fullback for Udinese recently, but can operate in those forward positions. So there's a host of, I haven't counted them, I'm going to say about 20 names that are all within a shot of filling maybe 6, 7 spots within that Argentina team. And when you consider that you've got guys like Messi, Dybala, Di Maria, Correa, both of the Correas, Papu Gomez, all operating within that spot. So it's so difficult to break into that. And I think Dan and I were speaking on the last podcast about Diego Carlos as to why he's not necessarily had as many Brazil callers as you think he had. It's just because when you have Marquinhos, Eder Militao, Thiago Silva, the list goes on, Felipe, it's so difficult to break into that setup. And you can be a genuinely brilliant player, as these guys are, and not make your international side. And so I think that's perhaps why Buendia has struggled to truly crack that. But he has been called up. He has got a cap. It has happened. But I don't think he'll be going to this year's World Cup, which is sad. He would have to do something incredible between now and then. And even then, he'd be such a rogue shout. And at this point, it's the tried and tested names that end up going to the World Cup. I don't think we'll see too much difference in the World Cup squads compared to those that we've just seen for the most recent international break. And I think that's why we've seen an upturn in Coutinho's form. And I know I'm only talking about the Southampton game, but it's put that he was a mainstay in that Brazil squad. And part of the lure, I think, to come to Villa was Gerrard said to him, he was like, look, you can get back in that into that Brazil team. And I think Tite said the same, the Brazil manager. He said, all you need to be is in some kind of remote form and you will play for Brazil. There are players out there that are getting more goals and assists for Brazil over the last 11 months, which was the last time that Coutinho didn't make a Brazil call up 11 months ago. This is the first one since then. That have been in better form than him. Of course there are. There are so many Brazilian midfielders and forwards that have got more goals and assists in the last 11 months than Coutinho that haven't been called up. But as I said, it's these tried and tested names that end up making the cut. And so Coutinho, I think, played with a little bit of fire in his belly, played with a bit more intensity against Southampton. And whilst it wasn't a classic performance, it was definitely an improvement. And so the two of them are in a very similar situation now. And I think this is where it might bring the best out of them or it might go another way. It's really hard to say, but in terms of Buendia, it's hard to imagine that he's not disappointed with his role in the team at the moment, that he's not unhappy. And that why wouldn't he start to be looking? This is into his second season now. How many games has this guy got to go through where he plays well, he's dropped for the next game, before he starts to lose patience? And you couldn't blame him for it. You really couldn't, because he's so much better than he's being allowed to show. And I mean, I found this quite incredible stat, really, in that in all of since 2018-19, Buendia has created more chances. This is as of last season as well, by the way. Has created more chances, 344, than any other player in England's top two divisions. That's incredible. And he's such a good player. He can definitely go out there and play week in, week out for a Premier League team. 100%. It's what we want to see him do. But the question is whether he will get that opportunity. And I think it depends on, and I don't believe that Gerrard has his favourites. I don't believe that Gerrard picks his mates. I think he's far too professional to get trapped into that. I just think Coutinho is an incredibly difficult player to leave out. But as we've said before on the podcast, whilst Coutinho feels like the bigger name, and it feels almost wrong at points to put a player like Coutinho on the bench, Buendia, in terms of how much they cost, was twice as much as Coutinho. So is he not the club's bigger asset in that sense? Are you not financially more motivated to play guys like Buendia than Coutinho? Because we paid 35 to 40 million from Buendia, where it was only sort of 20 million euros for Felipe Coutinho. So that's some more food for thought, I think. We're incredibly lucky to have these two players. And I think the not being included in the Brazil squad is exactly what Coutinho needs. And I think when he's playing like that, it is very difficult to drop him. And it's very difficult to imagine Buendia, therefore, getting into this team on anything other than a substitute basis. And whilst that is wrong, it's clear that we want to get the most out of Coutinho. I think his ceiling is still very high. I think what he can do for this club is still great. And I just hope Emi Buendia is still invested and is willing to maybe bide his time in that sense. Personally, it's not the way around that I would have it. I think we've sort of changed how we look at this squad in terms of age and experience. We've raised that bar slightly in recent years, but I still think the younger, hungrier, he's still only 25, I believe, Emi Buendia, 24, 25. I still think that's the way to go. I don't know who's the better player. That's incredibly difficult to ask, but I think Emi Buendia plays with a bit more tenacity. I think you get more defensively out of Emi Buendia. So it's very difficult to say in terms of a long-term future what he has at this club. Obviously, he's still on a sizable contract, and it's still, I guess, relatively early in his Villa career, but late enough to think that I think he will be aggrieved by how fewer starts he's making. And that's about where it ends on the debate. You can offer up all the stats and everything like that. And guys, I try to provide you with as much perspective as you can into why I think he's such a good player, why I think he's so rare, and why I think for guys like Ali Watkins, who love to play in behind, why guys like Emi Buendia are so important. You think of that Everton goal, they worked it so well between the two of them. I think that it can really work. I think Buendia is better through the middle than he is out wide, but maybe with guys like Bailey really struggling to make form, maybe a return to the wide areas might be what Emi needs. Maybe that's his best way to get back into the team. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure you download OneFootball using the link in the description. Let me know your thoughts on Emi Buendia, where you think he fits best into this team, if you think he has a future in this team, and what role you think he fits best. Emi or Coutinho, they're often pitted against each other, but is there a way to get them both into this team? I'd love to have that discussion with you guys down below. Make sure you stay listening. There is a match preview coming as well this week, which will unfortunately be another solo one, but I'll be looking ahead to that game against Leeds on Sunday. So stay tuned, guys. I hope the Villa.